Hi all. I thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about the assignment that will be for this week coming up, and also one that we did for the last 2 weeks to help really allow you to zero in on why this assignment is important and can be useful to you in terms of your own understanding and development of mindfulness and its practice in your life, as well as what you share with others in your paper. And in fact, this week's application, the variation of what's on the bottom of this week's schedule, will be very relevant to your paper topic and to your developing understanding of mindfulness. And I'll explain that in class for sure, and I'm touching on it here so that you can, on reflection, or revisit this to be reminded of certain things that we discussed in class. So importantly, the original assignment from a couple weeks ago was to begin to think about, given your semester, given the practices you've learned, given the practices you found useful, given the good work you've put in to work it into your day, following along what at the beginning of the semester was sort of a required regular period of practice, and then opened up for you to begin to navigate that terrain in a way that works for you. In your paper, you'll probably be sharing, what the science is pointing out in terms of what's useful if one is interested in the benefits, we could say, of practice in terms of the nature of settling into a regular practice. But at the same time, it can be challenging, or different people can have different approaches to this material. And so you would also share your own direct experience. And so what you've been doing for the last several weeks and will for the next several weeks will really provide you with the data to be able to not just upon reflection consider what it's been like and what you would suggest to the reader, but actually having really been giving it serious thought, both in terms of keeping track of and then ultimately being able to look back on this period as we approach the end of the semester. You could say where the rubber meets the road, and whatever your experience is and whatever you choose to write about in that regard is entirely up to you. Now, importantly, you identified several weeks ago your primary practice and a settling technique and a but for a pause. And the reasons for this is because you will, in your paper, undoubtedly be sharing with the reader a primary practice, at least one, but maybe just one, a settling technique, perhaps just one. You'll, of course, share with the reader about mindfulness practices generally and settling techniques generally, so that in a paragraph or so they understand the larger landscape of what these are and why it is that we might draw upon them. But then you'll be specifically, as your paper develops, going into greater length about the specific practice and settling technique that you have drawn upon for yourself. I say the one, you might have it where there's two that you like and there's different reasons why they're useful, and you can touch on that in your paper. But given the length of the paper, and it's relatively short, it's 15 pages, and only a handful of pages will ultimately be devoted towards explaining why the practice can be useful, I have found that if you keep it simple with one practice and one settling technique, and you'll find that you won't have a diluted discussion. You'll actually be able to offer the reader more, and in doing so, offer yourself a deeper understanding. And that's where this upcoming week's practice is going. Now, in looking over the things that you turned in last week, some of you sort of approached the elements of, in different sorts of ways. What's intended here is to have a very clear and clean read on the elements of that practice. Essentially, what are the instructions for the practice? If you were to not listen to a guided practice, but you were to guide yourself, what would you be guiding yourself to do? So I very much appreciated the various things that you all wrote down, but to be very specific, because we're not going to do this again, this week's schedule will move into another direction, but it assumes that you have a very clear understanding of what the elements of your practice, your primary practice, are, because you will be communicating those elements in your paper to the reader, and you want to be able to do so in a way that's crystal clear. Crystal clear. So I encourage you, if you were left uncertain of what was intended here, or uncertain of whether or not what you would have put there was useful or correct or in the ballpark, then you might want to reach out to me and inquire. But this isn't rocket science. If it's the focused attention practice, it's placing your attention on an object with the intention to remain with the object. And when you notice your mind wandering, bringing attention back to the object. It's like I've shared in class. What are the elements of a contract claim? Offer, acceptance, consideration. It's the nuts and bolts. It's the bottom line. Then any practice that's a focused attention practice, or that claims to be a focused attention practice, if it doesn't have those elements, it's not a complete practice. Or if it does other things, then it's more than that. And how simple can you keep it to get to the main core kernel of the practice itself? This becomes relevant this week, because this week we move to another deeper consideration where you identify your subject. On the form it'll say, what is a succinct expression of your topic? Mindfulness and blank. And it's just going to be one or two words. Negotiation, being cold called on in class, studying for the bar. Whatever it is, you reduce it, even though it's obviously going to be more than the 2 or 3 words you put down. It's like, what is the bottom line? Because next to that, you're asked, what is a pertinent challenge? So given the situation that you've identified, what is a challenge that one finds themselves in that situation? If it's studying for the bar, maybe it's being in the library where people are making noise, or that's the challenge, or finding time to study when your family wants you to spend a lot of time with them. Obviously, if it's studying for the bar, it's a bit perspective, but one of you might be writing in that. So that's an example. That's the challenge. As we'll discuss in class, we'll revisit that. We've talked about it already. We'll be talking about it again. Importantly, the challenge is just the tip of the iceberg. It's the obstacle. What is the obstacles? And in this case, you're being asked, what's a primary, obstacle that emerges when that challenge is experienced? And that's where we get to that which the mindfulness practice is directed, right? If your family's saying, let's meet for dinner every night, and you're like, oh my God, like that's asking too much. I feel pressure and I feel like I'm, going to disappoint them, or fear that it's going to affect some outcome. The challenge is that people want to spend time with you. That may or may not change, and the mindfulness practice isn't supposed to change that. That's not where that practice is going. It might create in you a way of communicating more effectively, or approaching that challenge in a way that leads to the challenge, in fact, situation shifting and changing. But that's not why we practice mindfulness, so that our family doesn't want to spend as much time with us, or so that people in the library will be quieter. That's not the way it works, right? But it's the internal obstacle that we experience, feeling like we're going to disappoint, feeling guilty, getting frustrated, angry, whatever that might be. That's what the practicing of mindfulness is directed towards. And when we attend to that, everything, that's a game changer. So you'll be identifying at least one primary pertinent challenge that's in relationship to your topic, as well as a primary obstacle that emerges in response, we could say, to that challenge that's directly connected to your paper. In your paper, whether you call them challenges and obstacles or not, and that's completely unimportant, it doesn't matter, you will be nonetheless addressing them. You'll be speaking to them when you describe certain situations and what arises and how the mindfulness practice can be helpful. So here we're taking a moment and a week to really zero in on what's a primary challenge, what's a primary obstacle, because it surely will appear in your paper. And then you're invited to, this week, really be thinking about, and your ability to make notes on the schedule that you'll be given, the weekly schedule. Each time you practice is an opportunity to, afterward or beforehand, or maybe even during, although it's not meant to be a period of practice where you're thinking about this, but to really begin to sort of explore the why. Why does practicing focused attention, or the body scan, or open monitoring, or connection, why does it lead to a change in the obstacle? Why? This is very much like saying, why does this medication work, right? So if somebody says, oh, here's a medication that you can take and it will reduce blood pressure. Okay. Now, you could be the kind of patient that says, great, I trust you. You're a physician or whomever. You're saying that, authorized to dispense medication and medical advice. You're saying that this pill will help with my blood pressure. And you don't have to know the why. You can just take the pill. Similarly, somebody could say, oh, you've been practicing mindfulness? You say, yes. And how has it been helpful? Well, one of the benefits is this. And they say, oh, okay, what do I do? And you say, well, here's the practice, here are the instructions, and here's a guided practice that you can listen to get you started. And if you do this, I think you'll find that this might happen. That's like saying if you take this pill, you might have a reduction in blood pressure or whatever that benefit is. But it's like we're like in medical school here. We're like in mindfulness school here. If you were to say to your physician, why, oh, interesting, why will that pill help with my blood pressure? And they go, I don't know, that's what the pharmaceutical rep said. You'd probably be like, because at the very least it's hearsay, and at the very most your physician, is winging it. So here, while it's not necessary to have that deeper understanding, this is a class where that deeper understanding is fundamental. And in writing the paper, it is like you're writing a paper as if you were a physician explaining to an audience of medical professionals why this pill works. What's going on with the system when you take the pill that leads to the outcome? What's going on in this system when you practice mindfulness that leads to that outcome? In your papers, and for your own understanding and in many ways appreciation of the value and the meaning of practice, and ultimately beyond practice, just of the nature of what it is to be more mindfully aware and present during the moments of our life. In particular, we could say the challenging moments, or what might otherwise be more challenging moments. This is really important. So we'll be talking about it in class. You'll have an opportunity this week to be reflecting on it on a daily basis. And as I've indicated before, you're always welcome to email me with a request for me to do, this is about a 12-minute video, a video, presumably a lot shorter with a shorter topic, but with any question that you've got, even if it's a question that's asking for more detail around challenges and obstacles. And I will be responsive and share with everybody short videos that respond to questions that you may have as you're working on your paper, and you begin to find, as I think many of you will, as you really get into it, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I don't really understand that as well as I thought I did. You probably know this from all the classes you've taken in law school, where you sort of understand it, and you may even get excited about it, but then as you begin to explain it to somebody or begin to work on writing it up, you begin to realize where there's some holes in your understanding. And this is, I think, where many of you will understandably and quite appropriately find yourself as you begin working on your paper. So I hope this is helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the days to come.